Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
We are back again in the Chicago suburbs for today's case. And the suspect is actually someone my dad has met after he joined a group of my dad's friends and they visited northern Wisconsin on a snowmobiling trip. So this is a little bit of a personal connection. But before we really dive into that, what is our question for today?
Okay, so inspired by this snowmobiling trip, what is your favorite winter activity?
It depends on where I am. In Chicago, nothing really. I like to stay warm in my apartment.
Yeah. But if you were up north,
yeah, it was back in the day. It was definitely snowmobiling.
Okay,
that was a lot
I've never
of fun.
Been on one. Is it like
up north? It's a whole different world when it comes to snowmobiling.
Right.
You ride your snowmobile to school. It's your car.
Oh, that's awesome. Is it like
you put your helmet on top of your locker and
is it like
you just ride to school every day?
Is it like riding a jet ski or like riding a
kind of?
I've never ridden.
Yeah, it's probably more similar to like a jet ski and a four-wheeler than anything.
Okay. Okay.
You can be very comfortable in your snowmobile. Like, yes, you're flying across the lake in zero temperature, like 0 degrees. But you actually, you can be so toasty on your snowmobile. Most of them have seat warmers and hand warmers.
Oh.
And all the gear is really designed for that wind resistance to keep you warm.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, if you're outfitted right, you're super comfortable on it. And there's not much better than flying across a lake on a snowmobile. That's especially in fresh snow. And
I was gonna say, you've told me before that there are lakes in northern Wisconsin where you're from that freeze completely, right? And you can
absolutely
walk
all of
across them. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So the way that right now, I was just up there for Christmas. The temperatures are so warm. It was like 50 degrees and raining, and we went on a beautiful walk through the woods on Christmas Day. But usually by now the lakes are usually probably like 6 to 9 inches thick on average. And I think the marker to allow vehicles to travel across the lake is 12 or 14 inches.
Oh, okay.
That seems the DNR will measure this and make sure it's safe to go across and everything.
Right.
But we used to drive our cars on the lake and go ice fishing. You'd take your truck, you pull your shanty behind it, and that's normal.
I was gonna say, what you know about some ice fishing? Like, do you have any idea about like the depth you want if you're like ice fishing? Do you want it?
Well, again, that all depends. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
it depends on what you want to do out there. Like when I was up there for Christmas, there was ice on the lake. It was very thin, but I saw people out there ice fishing. Like you can walk across it, but you don't want to take a vehicle out there.
Right. Okay.
But no, I've been ice fishing. My brother-in-law has a shanty that has a little fireplace in it. So I'll go and I'll drink some beers by the fireplace, and then he'll be out there fishing with his tip-ups, and he brings his deep fryer out there, and so he'll deep fry the fish he just caught and then serve it to me in the shanty next to the fireplace. I'm like, this is ice fishing.
Yeah, you're like, oh, hell yeah, this is the best kind of ice fishing. We used to...
This is my version of ice fishing. I just get the final cooked product.
Yeah.
And I'm good.
I grew up, as y'all know, in Cleveland, real close to Lake Erie, which doesn't completely freeze in the winter.
Yeah,
to my knowledge.
Great Lakes don't
yeah,
freeze
it does not. But I don't think we have any in Ohio. I think we're not far enough north for stuff to freeze solid. Like stuff will freeze over, but you can tell it's like maybe like 2 inches thick, and you could crack it really easily with like a boot.
Oh no, we would go. I lived on a lake for a while, so we would shovel part of it and make like an ice rink, and do all sorts of stuff as a kid.
That's so fun.
But what about you? What's your favorite winter activity?
So I'm with you. My favorite winter activity is staying inside and being warm.
Yes, put on a good movie and curl up with a cozy blanket and some hot chocolate.
Yeah, as soon as I asked this question, I was like, I could say what winter activities I don't like to do. But the reason I asked Sam if it's like jet skiing was because I do love to jet ski. So I think I would potentially really like snowmobiling. I've ridden...
It's fun.
It's
a lot of fun.
This might be another side question. I've ridden an ATV before. Is that similar to a snowmobile?
Yeah, I'd say it's more similar in the aspect of the majority of trails because, like, you're not on the lake a whole lot in reality. No, that's just where you can really open up and, like, push your throttle. But,
right.
No, you're on winding trails through the woods, which, in my experience with ATVs, that's what I do.
Yeah. That's what we did when I rode an ATV.
Yeah, and it's more like that. But it's also a different feel being in the snow versus just on the dirt and the trail of an ATV or even in the water on a jet ski. It's just a whole different feel having the skis and the track, and then like you can also alter it and you could put spikes in your track and then you don't have like a potential fishtail or anything like that.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways that you can ride.
Yeah, I would say my favorite winter activity, just having not done much but being on the ATV, I would say maybe ATVing if I'm back home. Like if I had the chance to do again, I might. My family doesn't own one or anything, but I enjoyed hanging out on one. It was fun.
Yeah, I haven't had a snowmobile in a very long time, but I loved it when we would go out.
Yeah. And here in the city, though, there are some cool wintertime festivals. And I think one of my favorite winter activities, it's not really, I guess it's called being nosy, and I do it year round. But in winter, it's also really fun because everybody puts on their Christmas lights. And even I live in an area where there's a lot of high rises. Sam, you live in an area where there's a lot of mid to high rises. And a lot of these buildings kind of go all out and they do their trees in the front and they do the sign of their building or whatever. And I really do like when they light up the major thoroughfares. Like they do that big ceremony of the Christmas tree at Millennium Park and in the lighting of the Michigan Mile lights. But I like it even more in the neighborhoods because you get to see like a little more variety. Like you get to see people who are like, this year Christmas is purple, and
right, I'm like totally the parade of homes type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I also, if you put your Christmas tree in the window and you leave it open, I am going to look into your house.
Right.
I just am, and especially, and if you have your window open and a leg lamp in your window. There's 100% chance I'm going to look in your window. I'm looking in the window right now of a man across the way who has it open for his Christmas tree. And you
would have loved the bar I went to the other day.
You sent me a picture.
With some college friends. Yeah, and it's a bar called Cleo's in Appleton, Wisconsin, and it is fully decked out Christmas all the time.
Oh.
And we had a drink called Dirty Snowball, and it tasted like a Frosty, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. That sounds
I only meant to be there for an hour, and I think I was there for about 5.
What was it called again? A Dirty Snowball?
It's called Cleo. Oh, Dirty Snowball. Yep, that's their like signature drink.
Dirty Snowball. Okay. That sounds awesome.
Really good.
And yeah, Sam did send me a picture, and they, a couple bars do that here too, where they'll go crazy for Christmas, and they literally call it like their winter pop-up, like Christmas pop-up, because they've literally decorated
theirs is there all year round.
All of it. Oh, wow. Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's kind of fun.
Actually, we're getting off on a tangent, but it makes me laugh.
Sorry.
I used to go to that bar all the time with one of my best friends when we were in college. He lived in that town. I went to college very close to there, and that was like our hangout because it was kind of the dive bar.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of my friends texted me, and she lives in New England, and she's like, I'm coming in town. I saw this bar on TikTok, and I really want to go. And I'm like, that's my hangout. Like,
and you were like,
we have to go.
You were like, amateur, let's do this.
Right? Like, I'm all in. So yeah, that was just really fun. It was really nice to see my college roommates and meet up at one of my old bars I used to go to back in the day.
Yes, the old haunts.
Right. But let's go ahead and dive into this case. It's going to be kind of a short one. There's not a ton of background information. This case is from 1997. Mm-hmm. So we don't have social media and that sort of stuff to kind of go off of here. Mm-hmm. But as I kind of mentioned in the intro, there's a interesting twist where my dad actually hung out with the man who was arrested for this crime.
I can't believe this. And I'm sure you'll tell the story you told me before we were on air, but I can't believe that, like, this is another Danny Green situation.
Kind of, yeah. And like you all have, if you've been listening, you all know this podcast has kind of become a family thing for me. My sister's been on it, my mom's been on it. Mm-hmm. And now it's my dad's turn. He's not going to be in the episode, but he's the one who recommended I look into this after he told me the story. Because he met this man. We're not going to go into him quite yet. We'll talk about Amber Creek first. Okay. But Amber Creek was murdered in 1997, and my dad's interaction has just zero relevance to the case itself. And it was quite a few years ago at this point. I don't know. We don't know exactly what year. We can't remember. But a lot of my dad's friends come up to northern Wisconsin for their yearly snowmobiling trip. And this has been going on since I've moved up there, potentially even before that. I don't quite know. But they have a cabin that they go to every year. And my dad would either go out and ride with them if he had the day off, or he'd just go back to the cabin after they had their kind of day trip riding their snowmobiles. And he'd just go after work to have a few drinks and hang out. Mm-hmm. And our suspect today was visiting with those friends. So it was kind of a friend of a friend type of scenario. Ooh. And my dad didn't get any weird vibes from him. He said that he was actually very friendly. Mm-hmm. And after I was talking to my dad about all of this, it kind of got me thinking around this time period. And I think I may have met this guy once before. I don't remember. But when these guys come up, they don't have their own snowmobiles. So they always rent snowmobiles from some of the local rental shops. And I had to go drive them up to this rental shop and then drive their car back to their cabin. Because they all obviously need to get on their snowmobiles and then ride them back. Mm-hmm. And so I drove a big SUV up of all of my dad's friends, like 30, 40 miles to go pick up their sleds. And he might have been in that car. I don't remember.
Right. But he could have been.
He could have been. It was around this general time that my dad thinks he would have visited. And I would have been maybe 17 or 18 years old at the time. Because most of these guys, like, I grew up with, and they've known me since I've been a baby.
Right, and you're old enough.
So, like, I feel very comfortable around these guys. Yeah, and like, these guys, they're like family.
Yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily pick out, like, oh, I get bad vibes from this person, because you're in a safe kind of spot.
Yeah, they were hilarious. I remember vividly getting into the car. They thought that they were going to be, like, cool with this, like, teenager coming in. They're listening to, like, terrible rap. Like, not the stuff that I'm a fan of, at least.
Terrible rap.
And they're, like, bobbing their heads along. They clearly, like, don't know the music. But they, like, put it on because, like, this teenager is going to help them out. And
right, teenagers like rap. What are they saying?
Right? So it's just really funny. Like it turned into this big joke with all of them. That's just kind of the people that they are. So once we kind of get into these details of the case, it really changes a lot of perspective. I'm like, you really don't know people.
No, no.
So like that, it's a little crazy. But before we talk about the man who did this, let's go ahead and talk about Amber Creek.
Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed in my research is that a lot of the basic facts are reported very differently. So I'm doing my best to piece things together as accurately as I can. But even as basic as where Amber is from is reported very differently in articles. So please note that I'm really trying to do my best here. I'm trying to use as reliable sources as I can. But even like NBC, Tribune, ABC, they all say some different things.
Wow.
So this might not be like perfect on point, but I've done my best to get as clear and accurate information as I can. And in addition to this being 97, before the modern age of internet and social media, it's kind of hard to piece these together accurately. And there's also an apartment building in Indiana called Amber Creek. And that came up in my search a lot. So it was kind of difficult to weed through some of the information.
And it's tricky when major sources like NBC, ABC are reporting it is different.
Exactly.
Interesting, as you say.
What we do know is Amber was born on July 2nd in 1982 in Park Ridge, Illinois, which is just outside Chicago, kind of northwest of the city. And I'm not entirely sure when, but her parents split when she was very young. And this could have even been before she was born. I just know that almost immediately she lived with her mom in Lake Zurich, Illinois, which is a little bit further out into the suburbs, a little bit further north. And again, I'm not entirely sure who. I've seen some articles that state who, but that's more on like a blog form type of article versus an accredited source. But she was removed from her mom's home at the age of 6 because she was sexually assaulted.
Oh, no.
So
that's terrible.
What I've seen is that it was mom's boyfriend. I don't have a name. I wouldn't say it if I did because there's no proof of that. But that seems to kind of make sense, just logically, based on just data of
if she was
who may abuse a young child.
Yeah, and if she was removed from the home, like that's a pretty significant sexual assault. For them to remove her from her mother's care. Oh, that's terrible. So we do know that. So that did happen.
It did happen. That's something that's very consistently reported, that she was removed due to a sexual assault. So at this point, she moves in with her dad in Palatine, Illinois, which is closer to Park Ridge than Lake Zurich, but it's like less than 10 miles apart, I think. So it's still in the same general area of the suburbs. And from what I read, Amber's father, Robert Creek, was a really loving and caring father. And he did what he could to support Amber. But unfortunately, this trauma that she went through at such a young age really impacted her as she became a teenager. She was very depressed. And she started to act out. She would sneak out of Robert's home so that she could drink and use drugs. And I've never seen like specifically what sort of drugs she was into, but still, you're a young teenager. That has a huge impact on your life, regardless of how severe the drugs may be. Yeah,
and how severe the trauma was. Just like we said, it would have had to have been pretty egregious to get her removed from her mom's home. And it doesn't really matter what kind of drugs she was using. The bigger tip-off is she's sneaking out of her dad's house. you know?
Exactly.
Like, so it's like, oh no, you're just putting yourself in danger, you know? But I understand with the unresolved trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also the mid-90s at this point. Our reaction to going through trauma like this is so different than it was at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult for Robert to deal with. And at times, Amber would just run away for days at a time. And he didn't know what to do. And she once told one of her cousins that she would sneak out and go to this wooded section of an area park and meet up with older men.
Oh,
so obviously that's terrifying.
Yeah, that's not good. No, oh no.
And I didn't know this existed, but when I was doing my research, I discovered that Generation Y podcast has a blog, which I'm certainly going to be diving into a whole lot more because I really like Generation Y. But they actually discussed this case in their blog. And they actually started the post with a statement that Amber made to her stepmom, Diana. And she said, quote, "It's easier to be high, homeless, and on the run than sober."
Wow.
And at this point in 97, Amber is only 14 years old. And she's saying things like this.
I was going to ask, like, how old was she saying this? Because that is so incredibly sad. Like, it's just so, like, the trauma is so severely impacting her. Just to be sober is painful. And we talked a little bit about it in our two-parter on the Cecil, and we will about how, you know, it's drug users and the mentally ill. There's really often not enough compassion and understanding of what they've been through when they're sober, and then why would they want to return to that state? But also to just have your 14-year-old tell you they'd rather be homeless and on the run is so sad.
Yeah, and Robert, he just didn't know what to do to help his daughter. He couldn't afford the therapy that she needed. They recommended residential therapy, which is a whole nother ballgame, especially when it comes to financial. And he couldn't afford it.
I completely understand.
So in December of 1996, he actually took Amber to the local police department. And he said that she is not able to live with him anymore. And she became a ward of the state. So he believed that Amber would be able to get the care that she needed and that it would be paid for by the state of Illinois if he turned over care. Oh. And that was his plan. Because he loved Amber. He really wanted the best for her. He just couldn't give it to her.
And I wonder
so he thought this was a solution.
Yeah, and I wonder if, I feel like lately, as of now, 2023 / into 2024, we're a lot more aware of the foster care system. And
if you literally read my next line, that's exactly the point I'm making as well. No, I agree with you.
Okay, go ahead.
You're right on point.
You can go ahead and cut that if you want. But yeah.
No, you're good. Because you caught on to the same exact thought as me. It is.
Yeah.
I don't think he had an understanding of how rough the foster care system can be.
Yeah. And how it can. I doubt that this man thought by turning over custody of his daughter to the state, I doubt that he made the conscious decision, like, this will damage my daughter further. I better put her into that situation. I highly doubt that happened. I do believe that he thought she would get the care she needed.
Yeah, I do too. And every article that talked about this part really gave that same impression. and especially with all of the wide reporting in this, I really feel like the people who are writing these articles got that same feeling from him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear that he had a lot of remorse after you figure out what happened with this decision. I will say right now, I do not believe this decision is what led to these events happening. I think that they probably would have happened anyway. But he thought he was helping her. And with the foster system, like as you were saying, we know nowadays that there's a lot of flaws in it. And it's even more difficult when you're a teenager entering the system.
Yeah. And because you said 14.
14.
Was it around there? Oh,
yep, she was 14.
A teenager,
and despite multiple attempts, they could not find her a foster home. And this made it so she actually ended up at a youth center on the north side of Chicago off Halsted. And you can only assume what Amber could be feeling at this point. She's 14. She can't live with her mother because of this sexual assault that she experienced at so young. And she moves in with her dad, and he gives her up when she's clearly struggling mentally. Like, as we said, we believe it's out of good intention, but her point of view, I could imagine being like, he quit. Yeah. And he doesn't want to deal with me anymore. So that can't help what she's going through mentally.
Yeah, like, she must have felt like thrown away and forgotten. I have to only imagine.
Like, this is all assumption, but
yeah, exactly.
I can understand how those feelings, she could have those feelings.
Yeah, I completely understand, especially at 14 years old. Definitely, you would probably at least feel a sense of abandonment, you know?
Exactly. And becoming a ward of the state did not improve her behavior. She still managed to sneak out of the youth home so that she could drink, use drugs, meet up with men. And even from the youth center, she'd be gone for days at a time.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe that. 14 years old and she's at a youth center and they don't notice she's gone for days at a time?
Oh, just you wait.
Oh no.
Just wait.
Oh no. Go. Tell me more.
So when Amber left the youth home on January 23rd of 97, she wouldn't return. And unfortunately, due to her history of running away while both living with her dad and at the group home, her disappearance was just not a top priority. And many reports speculate that the group home had assumed that Amber had turned to prostitution. And that was just her way of making money after running away. That's all speculation. None of that's confirmed. So we have no idea if that's true or not. I do think that there's a possibility she was in the mental state to do that. But like I said, there's zero proof behind those statements.
There's zero proof, but it's also, I mean, if you are a runaway young woman, sex work can be the first thing that people turn to. Because you can make money.
It's a way to put money in your pocket.
Yeah, it's a job. It's money. Is it dangerous? Chicago, yeah, it can be.
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, if you're desperate.
Exactly. And the Chicago Tribune put together a timeline. And in this timeline that they put together, they state that Amber was not reported missing for 5 weeks.
What?
Yeah. And so this is one of those things that is kind of misreported in a lot of different places. I'm choosing to trust the Tribune because they're the only ones that gave an actual timeline for it. A lot of articles just say she wasn't reported missing right away. And I know the Chicago Tribune, for the most part, has a good history of checking its facts. Yeah. Not all the time, but for the most part, they're pretty good about that.
Right. And according to them, it was 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
Gets better. So they finally informed authorities but they didn't even get the facts right. According to the Generation Y blog, the photo that was posted once her disappearance was reported wasn't even a picture of Amber.
What? Oh my gosh. How did we biff it so hard on this poor young woman?
Yeah. I was talking to my dad about this on the phone yesterday, and like I was just getting so heated, and him and I are just like agreeing but like yelling back and forth where it's like, no.
Right, yeah.
This is terrible. We don't believe this.
Do you believe this?
We don't want to believe it.
Yeah, because she's at this time like 14, maybe 15, maybe, because
she's still 14 at this point. Her birthday's July, so yeah, she's 14.
Okay, so she's still 14, and like they don't even have a photo. Like they didn't even take your picture when you were like checked into the group home. Like nothing. That's wild.
Well, it makes me wonder too how involved they were with her dad.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do know a lot of the articles reported that she was still in contact with her dad over the phone. And I believe even in the time period after January 23rd, when she left the group home, she was still in contact with her dad, at least for a period of time. So I'm not entirely sure if they even really contacted him since he gave up custody.
Wow.
Or if it was like the police who did a follow-up afterwards. That was hard information to find. But what if they didn't even contact her dad to get a photo? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, they might not have. Because, I mean, it does make sense, like what you just said, because he technically signed over custody. So he doesn't really have
the rights anymore.
Exactly. I was going to say he doesn't have any options here at all. And the better word is to say he doesn't have any rights anymore because, unfortunately, he signed them away. Oh, I just feel so bad for this poor young woman that we failed her so spectacularly because I'm sure this is about to get worse.
Oh, yeah. So, once the investigation finally got started, the investigators were able to determine that Amber was at a motel party in Rolling Meadows, another neighboring suburb, at a Motel 6. And I'm not sure how many people were at this party, but investigators honed in on 2 men. Unfortunately, there just wasn't enough information to help find Amber, and the 2 men didn't provide any additional information to the investigators, and there still just wasn't enough to hold them. So they're basically their names were on a list, and hopefully more information would come forward to either arrest them or clear them.
Yeah. So, like, they're basically added to the Rolodex of people to contact about this, but they don't have anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there was, like, no information on these men, really, either. I couldn't find ages, anything like that. So I don't even know if they were also teenagers or adults. I don't know.
Because I don't know. Well, it's 97, right?
Yeah.
Because I would imagine the room might not have been in her name or anything, but I would imagine
I don't think it could have been. I think you need to be 18 with
she's
an ID.
too young. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. She's too young to have this been her hotel room that she rented because she doesn't have the adequate ID. So I imagine this was described as a
party. So I think there were quite a few people there.
Yeah, and maybe they honed in on the host or something. Who knows? But
yeah,
way,
exactly. I don't know who these thinking 2 men were.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, it's not possible that, like, she rented out this motel room for this because she's too young.
On February 9th, 1997, only 17 days after she was seen at that motel party, A body of a teenage girl was found in a wildlife refuge in Burlington, Wisconsin by 2 hunters. This was Amber's body, but unfortunately she wouldn't be identified for another year.
Oh my God.
And I haven't seen it explicitly said, but if the Tribune article is accurate and she wasn't reported missing until 5 weeks after she ran away from the group home, it wouldn't be another 2.5 weeks until authorities even knew that she was gone.
Right. And so that means, oh my gosh, this one is for some reason just hitting me pretty hard. Like, she would have sat as a Jane Doe in the morgue, you know?
We'll get to that a little bit, because
okay.
And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. So this is something that will bring you a little bit of hope.
Okay.
And we'll get to that. It's just a little further down.
Yeah.
But when she was found nude from the waist down. She had a black plastic bag wrapped around her head, a human bite mark on her cheek, and either a receipt or a price tag stuck to one of her arms from a bookstore in Woodfield Mall in Schaumburg, Illinois. Again, that's all in that cluster of suburbs that she's been bouncing around in between.
Right.
And this mall is actually very close to where her father lived in Palatine.
Oh, okay. But she's in Burlington, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interesting.
And something additional found on Amber's body, which, well, I'll get into more of my thoughts on it close to the end here. But she had the word "hi" written on her hand. And with the way her body was positioned, it almost seemed like she was kind of waving her hand with this word "hi" written on it, like just H-I.
Oh my God.
So some reports say that she had multiple cuts on her face and that she was beaten, while a lot of the other reports don't mention this at all. So again, I don't know how accurate this is.
Right.
Similar to the bite mark, a few articles mentioned it, a few didn't. So take that with a grain of salt. I didn't see an autopsy report. I didn't see anything like that. But clearly a very terrible situation that she was forced into.
Yeah. I mean, nude from the waist down with a plastic bag wrapped around your head is already really bad. And I think you'll probably get to it, but it's interesting the way they use the word positioned, the way you used it. I'm interested.
I'll get to my thoughts at the end, because I do have some thoughts on this.
I was going to say, the way you stated it makes me think that there are thoughts. So, okay.
It's at the very end, because it's kind of like our concluding ideas.
Cool. So some of this is like, her body was in a state where there may have been some injuries. Was this was the "hi" on her hand, was that like pretty consistent in articles?
Yes. That's something articles talk a lot about, which is again why I want to give my thoughts later on.
Sure. Okay. So that was pretty, that's pretty across the board. But otherwise, we know that something terrible happened to her.
The autopsy did determine that Amber died from asphyxiation, likely from the plastic bag that was around her head, and that she had also been raped. Some articles mentioned strangulation in addition. Again, I don't know how accurate that is, because some did, some didn't. But investigators, they were able to pull fingerprints and DNA from the black plastic bag. That's really hard to say.
Yeah. And unfortunately, when we run across a lot of black plastic bags in our stories.
Right.
See, I couldn't even get it right. I was like, black Sorry.
So it's not an easy thing to say.
No.
But investigators were able to pull fingerprints and DNA from the black plastic bag, and unfortunately, there were no matches in the system. There was also semen found on her. Again, DNA was pulled from that. No matches.
Wow.
And as I mentioned, it would be a year before Amber would be identified. So after her autopsy, the community near where she was found came together to purchase a casket and a headstone, and they held a funeral for her as a Jane Doe. Nearly 100 people attended this funeral. Some of the police officers were pallbearers for her. And they didn't even know her name, but the community really kind of came together to support her.
Gosh. That's so nice. Like in like after just hearing this horrific thing that happened to her after she had already been through so much. She's only 14. She'd been through so much more than anybody should have to be. And it's so sad to me that she was laying there as a Jane Doe. But now, like, hearing this, I'm glad you mentioned it, because it does give, like, a glimmer of warmth to it. Like,
I do
like,
think
even though she may have had the emotion, she may have felt like she was abandoned, it does make it nice that in death she was not.
Exactly. And she was buried in Caledonia, I believe, in Wisconsin. And she's actually still there. They didn't move her after she was identified. They just replaced her headstone.
Okay.
So I think that is a form of honor. The people of that community truly respected her. And I really think that Robert appreciated that.
Yeah, because also, I mean, they would have had to buy the plot in the cemetery, so I completely see why they would have left her there, because that's like a nice thing that the people of this community did for them as a family. So I completely understand not wanting to move her.
So eventually, Amber's dad, Robert, was watching America's Most Wanted and actually saw a segment on Jane Doe, who was found at the border of Wisconsin and Illinois in Burlington. And he called investigators to see if there was any way that this could be Amber. And so it was at this time that she was positively identified through her dental records and DNA. And this came in 1998. And unfortunately, after this, there was no additional movement in her case. It became cold pretty quickly. So it wasn't until... go ahead.
No, I completely understand, like, not having a match in CODIS, but, oh man, this has to be the kind of case that just turns a good cop's head around. Like, I bet there were, I mean, you said some of them were pallbearers at her funeral. Like, this must have really upset them. Because you have...
Yes. A lot of them say in articles that, like, this is the one that they thought about for years. And that they just hoped someday they'd find the right information. And I'll tell you, they did. We'll get to it very shortly here. But it haunted them for a long time.
I believe that.
And it wasn't until 2013 that a lab in Oklahoma actually started to do additional forensic testing on the evidence. Specifically, that plastic bag and the semen that was found on Amber's body. This new testing came up with one suspect, James Eaton.
Oh. Wow. Okay. Only one suspect.
Like, it was a clear match.
That's pretty... Yeah, I was going to say, that's a pretty good match.
So James was from Palatine, Illinois, which is where Amber lived with her dad. And in 1997, he was 5 years older than Amber. And they had mutual friends in common.
But he is still of age and elder.
He was 19.
I was going to say, you're 19 and she's 14. Like, that feels a little ick. But I imagine there's more to come. I imagine there's more to come.
So in 2000, James was arrested on unrelated drug charges, and that's how his DNA was in the system and his fingerprints.
Okay. So, so sometime in between 98 when she was identified and 2013 when they do additional forensic testing, this man has been arrested and his DNA is now in the system.
Yeah, it was 2000, only a few years after.
Okay.
Amber's death.
And they just hadn't. Okay, yeah, and they just hadn't gone back to test it again until 2013. Okay.
Yeah, I think part of it too. I couldn't find out exactly where he was arrested. I have an assumption it was Illinois, and then it's Wisconsin that was doing all of the testing. So I wonder if being different states had an impact on why he wasn't caught sooner. I honestly, I don't know. That's just kind of my own thoughts behind it.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, not to be on a soapbox, but there's already so many untested rape kits in the system that I doubt people, as much as it sucks, I doubt people were like, let's go back and rerun that from before. The only way I imagine it happened was some of these poor police officers who just were there and were like, I'm not letting it go.
Yeah, I do know the DNA testing was done when she was found.
Right, because they identified her.
But that is the late 90s. And the technology just might not have been up to par as what it was in 2013. But since he had no record, no one looked back at it. And when he was arrested in a different state, it didn't trigger at minimally the fingerprints that they already had on file in Wisconsin. To say he could be tied to this crime as well, because they was just two different states, two different jurisdictions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's probably what happened, but who really knows at this point? And that's just my thoughts on it. I didn't read any articles that said anything like that. But it turns out that Eaton and Amber knew each other because Eaton actually lived in the same apartment complex as Amber and her dad. And I believe that's how they met. And I'm not sure if he was known to the police until this moment, before this moment or not. But they knew that they needed to act fast once they had this information back. And that they needed to ensure that they had the right man before making their arrest. And even the right man before bringing him in for questioning to not tip him off to anything.
So they thought, do you think they thought he might run?
I think it's a possibility because at this point they started to surveil him. They learned his routines. They learned that he would often walk from his apartment, which was just a block or two from the Palatine metro station. And he would walk usually smoking. And so what they did is they were watching him through all of this. And basically the moment he stepped on the train, he put out that cigarette right before stepping in. And they went right in, grabbed it so that they can compare the DNA.
Yep. You guys, smoking will not only give you cancer, it will also be a great way to track your DNA. So don't start smoking. Don't start smoking.
So once the DNA came back, it was clear that it was a match. And authorities made their arrest on April 8th, 2014. They charged Eaton with first-degree murder and hiding a corpse. And the one thing that I found really interesting in this, and I think it's just due to a lack of evidence, is this was coming out of Racine County in Wisconsin. He wasn't charged in Illinois. And it's my belief that the crime happened in Illinois, but I think that there was just no real way of proving it. And since her body was found in Wisconsin, all the charges came out of Wisconsin.
Yeah, I see that. They probably couldn't tie it.
If they did have evidence of the crime in Illinois, it would turn federal because he crossed state lines. And that didn't happen.
Exactly, to dump her body. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it really seems to be implied that the death happened in Illinois and that he drove her to Wisconsin, but there's no official proof of that.
Right. No official, they just couldn't prove it, but
exactly,
it very likely could have.
So initially, prosecutors requested bail be set at $1 million, which was granted. It was reduced at one point to $500,000. But he did get initially $1 million bail.
Yeah,
which is saying a lot, in my opinion. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I thought it should be. That's why. First of all, I was surprised bail was granted, given she was a minor, and I'm also further surprised that it ended up being reduced. But
I don't think he really had anything other than that one drug charge. I think if he had more charges under his belt, that'd be a different story.
Right. But I do support your opinion of the initial bond being set at $1 million says something.
That's a lot.
And even $500,000 is still a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So, they're
lot.
sending a clear message.
Exactly. Yep. And Eaton pleaded not guilty in October of 2014. But by the end of October, he actually changed his plea to no contest so that he could make a deal that he could go with a deal that prosecutors offered him.
Okay.
And there's a difference between no contest and guilty as well. No contest is basically saying that, yes, the evidence against me looks pretty bad and it looks like a jury would convict me.
Right.
But you're also not claiming innocence, but you're not claiming guilt as well. It's not like an Alfred plea where you're claiming innocence, but you say the evidence looks bad. You're just saying, I don't want to be part of it, essentially, is no contest.
Right. You're checking in no, I see that it's no good, but also I'm not willing to admit guilt.
Yeah, but I'm also, I can't really say I didn't do it all at the same time.
Yeah.
And so with this deal, his first-degree murder charge was reduced to first-degree reckless homicide, and the charge of hiding a corpse was dropped. Eaton received the maximum penalty of 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years, which would be this year, 2024. So I don't know when a parole hearing may be, but...
Yeah, I'm interested to hear that parole hearing.
Yeah, so I just know that it's coming up.
I have a lot of thoughts. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts.
So it seems like Eaton was pretty tight-lipped about what happened to Amber that night. But I'll give you my theory, which I just kind of pieced together from a lot of these different articles. But I believe that when Amber left the youth home in Chicago, she either called friends to pick her up, potentially even Eaton, or she took the Metra out to the suburbs. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Chicago area, the Metra is the train system that runs from downtown and kind of scatters over the suburbs. So it's a pretty easy commute back and forth.
Yeah, it stops less frequently than the regular train. It's sort of like a quicker shuttle to the suburbs.
So I think that's when she then ended up at the motel party because she had friends that were there. I think that's also why Eaton ended up at that hotel party. I didn't see anything 100% confirming he was there, but there were a couple witnesses that apparently came forward describing a man like him, but they didn't provide a name. They just provided some visuals, a visual description to the police that matched him. So I think it's fairly confident to say he was there.
Yeah. Question. I'm sorry if you've said this already, but the Motel 6 party, that was in the suburbs of Chicago.
That was in Rolling Meadows. Yep.
In Rolling Meadows. Okay. So,
which is all like right in that same general area.
Right, as like Palatine and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, Palatine, Schaumburg. All of those are like a cluster together.
I just wanted to check in because it's like, so it just gets muddled because I'm thinking along the same lines as you are, which was this could have likely happened in Illinois and not Wisconsin. And however, we do know that it would have become federal if they could prove it. I was just forgetting where we started. So
and they're bouncing around between all of these suburbs. I'm saying so many different suburbs names in here. They're all probably within like a 10-mile radius of each other. Like, this is a pretty small area that she's actually going in between. It's just they're all so clustered next to each other that there's all different names for these areas that she's in.
Yeah.
But we believe Eaton was also at this party. And the descriptions were given of somebody who generally represented him to the police. And at one point, Eaton kind of alluded, again, this is kind of like, I don't know if I trust the reporting, but it makes sense. But he kind of alluded that he had sexual gratification from asphyxiation. And that Amber's death would have been an accident. So that, again, that's one of those pieces of information that I saw reported in some places and not others. I saw most of the time that he like didn't talk about the crime at all. So I'm not sure how accurate that statement is, but with a bag being found around her head, I kind of understand where that's coming from, but I also kind of understand that could be coming from speculation as well. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But either way, I think that Eaton attempted to have sex with Amber, which resulted in her death. It could have been, quote unquote, consensual. Even though technically it's not. He's 19, she's 14. That's not technically consent.
But, I was going to say, we touched that a little, but...
Yeah, but she may have willingly had sex with him that resulted in an accident. Or she could have had sex with him, didn't want to be asphyxiated. He forced her, resulting in her death. Or she could have been raped and he could have asphyxiated her. Like, we just don't know. There's a lot of different ways this could have gone. But after whatever he did, he probably panicked. He probably then drove her up to the wildlife refuge in Wisconsin. And I think that's where the receipt came in that was stuck to her arm. Right. I think she was probably in the car and that was on the floor or something. And
because he's from the same building. Yeah, he's from the same building, so he would be visiting...
The same complex.
Yeah, he would be visiting spots in the same exact area, so it makes sense.
Exactly, and this is from, like, the big mall out there. Like, if you're from the Chicago suburbs, you know Woodfield. That's the biggest mall in the area.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah, I've spent countless hours in Woodfield as a kid. I've probably been to the store. It was a bookstore. I guarantee you I've been in there. Probably around this time in 97. But then let's go back to what we were talking about earlier with the "hi" written on her hand. I think this is nothing. I don't think this is evidence.
Okay.
When I was this age, I was constantly writing on my hands. I had friends who were writing on my hands. Like, I don't think that she was purposely positioned with it sticking out. And the reason I say this is because it seems pretty clear to me that Eaton did not want to draw attention to this. That's why he drove her out of state.
Right.
If he wanted to draw attention to it and he was placing her hand like that, that's pretty sadistic. And to me, it seems like he wanted to attempt to go back and live a normal life after this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that does make sense because when you're a teenager, you're writing all over yourself all the time, especially if you're in school or in a class and you want to talk to somebody, you write hi on their hand,
Yeah.
And I'm glad you clarified on the positioning because I was like, that feels a little weird. I bet Sam has thoughts on if this was intentional or not. And
I don't know the exact
sense.
positioning, what her body was in, even if she was like laying on her side or her stomach or her back. I don't know any of that. But I'm just thinking about, it doesn't seem like she was buried. I think he wanted to get done with this as quickly as he could.
Right.
And wasn't thinking about the details. Hence the receipt stuck to her arm. He wasn't paying attention to that.
Right. He was just trying to dump her somewhere he thought was quiet and get out of there. Because he really didn't seem to have much problem leaving any trace evidence, given that they got so much DNA from the crime scene. So it makes sense that he was probably just trying to get her away from him and not connected in a different state,
Yeah, I don't think this was something to like taunt police or do anything like that. And a lot of the articles like put a big emphasis on this, like how eerie is this? I think it's a coincidence. Yeah. I really do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But really, like that's kind of all we have for this case, and it's truly crazy to think about not really knowing someone. I know I said that in the beginning, but like my dad's friends met Eaton when they were bartending together at a bar out in the suburbs, and they became good enough friends to invite him up to their vacation in a cabin in northern Wisconsin. Like they trusted him enough to do that. And I know my dad said he really enjoyed conversation with him. He was a big Cubs fan. He had Cubs season tickets, and that was like that big talking point between him and my dad. And
that's the big talking point of everyone in Chicago. If you're a Cubs season ticket holder, I mean, so that speaks to more of like this could have happened in Illinois.
Well, yeah. Well, I think it did just because I think it probably happened at the Motel 6. In my opinion, I could be totally wrong. It could have been in his car. They could have driven up to Wisconsin together. Like that's possible. There's just no evidence of it.
Yeah, they can't prove it.
But yeah, I do remember like when my dad heard about all of this, him and his friends just being completely shocked about it. And then when you kind of look into it, seeing the plea of no contest, you're basically admitting that you did it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are. It's... Yeah.
But do you have any final thoughts on this case?
So, my final thoughts are, it's beautiful that the community in the suburbs came together and had her laid properly to rest. I think it's beautiful that happened. I do wonder why the prosecution, maybe it's just because they didn't have much. I don't expect that he'll get parole. I don't think so. I'm going to say right now, I'll watch.
At least not the first time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll watch in 2024 for the parole hearing and see if is he incarcerated in Illinois or in Wisconsin?
I don't know where he's incarcerated, but logically it'd be Wisconsin because the charges came out of Wisconsin.
Yeah. Okay, so then, I don't think he's going to get paroled right away just because of the age of his victim. She was so young. Like, the other thing that just sticks out to me as a final thought is just how tragic this is, that this young girl went through all of this in only the 14 years that she was alive.
Right.
She went through all of this.
Well, it's the age of his victim, and he received the maximum sentence.
Yes.
For this crime.
Yes.
and his bail was such a high number. I think that they really looked at it as he's a danger.
Right. And even though they're making a deal with him, they're still getting him off the streets. I don't love that they had to make a deal with him and get the charges reduced, but that's just a fact of getting the conviction sometimes, you know? If it comes to that, to get a conviction, then I'd rather see justice served, you know?
Well, and even if he was still charged with first-degree murder, he still could have easily gotten 40 years. Like, the sentence might not have really been different if he was charged with first-degree murder. Because 40 years is a lot of time.
It's a lot of time. Yeah, that's a lot of time. And then he didn't get parole until the first 10 years are completed. That's a lot of time. And I don't think he's going to get granted parole. So I don't think, frankly, he should be counting down the days.
The only thing I could see with him potentially being granted is on good behavior, which, based on my dad's experience with him, I think that could be possible. Because he seemed like a genuine, nice person. But it's like, he obviously had some sort of demons to have that power within him to do that. And then get away with it and live his life for 17 years.
Yeah, yeah. Like, he may be capable of being a good prisoner, being a genial prisoner, because of the way his personality is. But, I don't know. I think I'm with you. Yeah, I can see the only way he's getting released even a little early is with good behavior, which he might be able to accomplish. And even that might not stand to be enough. And I do think if he does get paroled, it's not going to be this year. I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's not terribly common to get paroled, especially for this violent of a crime, on your first time around.
Yeah.
Even with good behavior.
So. Yeah, yeah.
And I bet if Robert Creek has anything to say about it, he will make his voice heard and remind everyone what he did to his daughter.
I hope so. I hope so. And those are my final thoughts. I'm glad that she was found and identified and laid to rest, and I wish she had to go through less in her 14 years.
Yeah. But thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.